Thank you, Susan. Hey, the microphone works. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So just a quick agenda, just to let you know where we're going here. We're going to go talk about what is Agentic AI. We're going to use Agentic AI with SAS, so what do you need for that, what tools do you need to set up in order to use an Agentic AI with SAS 9.4. We're going to do a little coding demo. We're going to watch a little coding demo. We're going to talk about prompt engineering, which is really the sort of the work of a programmer in the Agentic AI era. And then we'll have the conclusion and questions. Okay? All right, so about this presentation, it is targeted towards SAS 9.4. If you're using SASPy, for the most part, you should be able to use the SASPy MCP and other tools that are specifically made to use Agentic AI with SASPy. SAS is developing those as we speak and has quite a few presentations this weekend on that. So I highly recommend going to their presentations so you can learn how to use Agentic AI with SASPy. SAS 9.4, it's a little harder. It's not enabled in the same way that SASPy is. So that's why we have this presentation. Most of what I present here applies to any Agentic AI. So those of you that like Copilot, Codex from OpenAI, there probably is a Gemini one, I just don't know the name. I use Claude, so I'm going to talk about using Claude Code, but realistically, there's no difference in terms of the tooling. It's just a matter of which one you download. And then finally, as with any AI solution, everyone remember what Brian said earlier in the opening session if you were there. It's not just give it a prompt and then execute the prompt, right? We have verification and validation also are really, really important steps in any AI workflow. This applies to just as much, if not more, to Agentic AI here that we're going to be talking about. Make sure that verification and validation steps are there so that you don't end up with hallucinations or just the AI doing something wrong. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that in the presentation, but just make sure you're doing that. I don't want anyone just presenting AI results and saying this is good and walking away. All right, so what is Agentic AI? This was a way more interesting question in November when I proposed this presentation. Probably most of you know. Who all knows what Agentic AI is? Raise your hand. Okay, so a good number of you. Agentic AI can independently break down complex tasks, use tools, and iterate on solutions with minimal human intervention. That's Claude answering my question. So this is the question you all had earlier. Claude answered that question, but it's correct, right? I did verify and validate it afterwards. The important parts here are that it can run code independently without you having to push the run button in SAS, and it can look at those results and then iterate. So it runs a SAS program, Python program, R program, whatever, and then it looks at the results and sees, does this meet whatever the criteria were for this being a success? If it did meet that, then it's good to go. If it didn't, then it can go back, fix its errors, change whatever is wrong, and try again. And it'll keep doing that until either it runs out of time or it meets the success criteria. In order for it to work, though, it has to be able to run SAS itself, right? How many people here use SAS Studio for 9.4? Right? Yeah, so maybe it could open up a web page and put your username and password in and do all those things. That seems difficult and probably not ideal, right? We want to be able to submit SAS code directly to the SAS server and get the results directly back and allow it to do that iteratively without you having to be involved. That's a really important enabler for Agentic AI to work the way it does. Here's a couple examples of Agentic AI. We've got Claude Code, Codex. Again, in November, I think these were the two real options. Now there's more. But I felt I needed some pictures. It was getting too much text. Why use Agentic AI? So Agentic AI does not replace the programmer, right? It is a tool. How many people here programmed in assembler? I'm looking over here. Okay, yeah. If you programmed in assembler, then good job. You're almost telling the computer to actually do the things that you're doing. It still has one more level below that, right? There's still machine code below that. But the rest of you are not directly telling the computer what to do, right? You're writing code in SAS, you're writing code in C, you're writing code in Python, whatever, right? That's a couple layers of abstraction away from what the computer's actually doing. This is just one more layer of abstraction above that, right? We're still programming, but now we're programming the agentic AI. We're telling it what to do using English-ish programming language as opposed to SAS or Python or whatever. But it still is, it's still very important to be able to do that. It's also puts a lot more focus on domain knowledge. So how many people here would consider themselves programmers first and anything else not first? All right, and who here is a researcher, an analyst, something else other than a programmer, and you also program? Yeah, you all are. This is going to help you all a lot because that knowledge, right? That healthcare knowledge, or I'm in survey programming. Or survey research, right? So my survey research knowledge is really important now because I understand how it works. I understand how surveys work. I understand how you draw a sample. I understand important things that you connect together between the survey and the sample and the results, weighting, imputation, all that stuff. That now becomes really, really important. You no longer have to memorize all the function names. You no longer have to remember exactly what the syntax is, but that knowledge in the domain is really, really, really valuable now, which to me is really cool because I am a programmer. I've been a programmer since, 1980s when I was like 6 years old. QBasic, yeah. But memorizing function names has never been my thing. I've been a SAS programmer since 2007, and I still have to look up the syntax to like tran word, things like that, like fairly basic functions that I've used lots. I still have to look up the syntax. I'm not good at remembering exactly what the order of the arguments is. So it takes that away and makes it a lot easier for me just to immediately use my domain knowledge. It's a tool that can increase productivity when used properly, and it can produce code that gives good results, but it's not an easy task to get there. You need good tests and well-developed prompts. When you get there and you understand how to give it good prompts, then you can reduce the time to delivery results significantly. And the other thing I want to mention, just as a thought, who likes to do data exploration? So you get a data set and you just sort of want to look around. Yeah? Agentic AI is really good at that. What I used to use before this, I think, was visual analytics. Right? I'd pop open a data set in visual analytics. Visual analytics is still a really good tool for that. Right? You can click on a couple variables, pop them into a chart, see, oh, this is interesting. I've got a lot of missingness here, or I've got, it's very one-sided. Most of my people answered yes instead of no in this question. That seems weird. The agentic AI is 10 times faster, though. I pass it the data set and I say, tell me what's interesting about this data set. I almost don't need almost any more information than that. And it'll pretty quickly tell me, oh, you've got a lot of missingness in this variable. Oh, you've got this, that, or the other thing. So it's really good for that data exploration. And it can produce charts. So for those of you that are visual people, not a problem. It can make them visual. All right. So now we've talked about what is agentic AI. Now, how do we use it? So there's 3 things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the interface. How do you actually give the prompt? How do you actually talk to it? The agentic AI solution itself, that's the Claude or the Codex or whatever. And then the method of connecting that AI solution to SAS. Okay? How does it run code? How does it get the output? So first off, in terms of the interface, typically you have 3 basic options here. You have what you see on the screen there, which is a standalone, just command line, right? So those of us that use IBM, MS-DOS 5 or whatever, probably are used to something looking like this, right? We've gone back in time, apparently, 40 years. You can use a component to an IDE, so a programming environment, like VS Code, for example. Or you can use a chat-like interface. So this is just like regular non-agentic ChatGPT or whatever. You can set up these agentic AI to have that sort of interface where you just ask a question, and then it sort of goes off and does stuff, but you don't have as much control in those spaces. I'm a big fan of the middle one. So I think the standalone is fine if you don't want to really look at what it produces, if you just sort of want to tell it to go off and do something. But standalone, you can't look at the program that it's writing without doing that somewhere else, right? You need a separate Notepad or something to look at the programs that's running. You have to go open them yourself. That's not as user-friendly for me. And the chat-like interface I really wouldn't use unless you are just doing something really quick. I actually didn't know that was possible for a while until I saw my wife doing this. She's a super smart biotech researcher, but not a programmer at all. She made herself something in like 10 minutes with the chat-like interface to allow her to see what some sort of combination of genomes things. I don't understand that stuff. But was able to do that in the chat-like interface, and that was fine for her because she's not a programmer. Looking at the Python code would not help her at all, right? I am a programmer, so I like the middle one. I have some links down here, Visual Studio Code, download, and how to use Claude Code in VS Code. It's an extension that Anthropic wrote for VS Code. You used to have to do sort of funky things to make it work. Now it's pretty much plug and play. This is what it looks like. Assuming this behaves, yes. This is actually working right now. You can see here, this is Claude Code section. Here it asks me if it's OK for it to do something. I said yes. And then here is the actual program as it's writing it. I'm scrolling around a little bit, but you're going to see it actually write some code. There you go. See a bunch of SAS code. Proc report. Who likes writing proc report code? I didn't mean who likes using proc report. I meant who likes writing proc report. OK. Y'all, I don't know. I like proc report. I don't like writing proc report code. So this was amazing for me. I love, even though it's really simple, but all these long defined statements, right? Like, oh, this went away, but those long defined statements with all the formatting and stuff, it can do that in like no time at all. It would take me 30 minutes to an hour just to write one of those, figure out all the syntax correctly. Now we're going to talk about how we can get the VS Code, Claude Code, et cetera, to talk to SAS. So I have a couple options here. If you have SAS installed on your laptop, you could just say, use SAS.exe to run this code. And it would do that. And it would be able to run SAS.exe, whatever, get the results back. Most of us don't have that. But even if you did, I would suggest the second option is better. So SASPy is a Python library produced by the SAS Institute that allows Python code to run SAS code. So it connects to the SAS server. It submits code over to SAS. It runs natively in SAS. So like this isn't Python pretending to do SAS. It's actually actual submitting code over to the SAS server. It runs it, and then it comes back to Python as a data frame. Even if you have SAS on your laptop, I still recommend using SASPy, mostly because the AIs are better at Python coding than they are at SAS coding. They'll have an easier time verifying and validating the results. They're still going to write a SAS program, right? We're doing SAS here. This isn't Python Innovate, right? Still writing a SAS program, but that verification wrapper around it that it uses to check to see if it got things right, which you'll see in the demo here, it will tend to do that in Python. It'll tend to be easy. It'll tend to have a better sense of what's going on. SAS.exe, the whole thing has to run before it really gets any results. And depending on how you have things set up. But even if it can see the log as it prints, sometimes it's just not as good at reading that log and understanding what's wrong with it. So I'm a big fan of SASPy. And if SASVia, of course, again, the MCP is a way better solution than any of this for VIA. So please go to one of those sessions, use that. But for SAS9, SASPy is the best option. This is text from SAS, hence the italics. SASPy is an open source Python package that allows Python coders to access SAS data and analytics capabilities. Add SASPy to your Python environment, configure it to connect to your SAS environment, and begin using Python to access SAS. I have two links there. The first one is where I got that quote from, but it also just describes SASPy, tells you how to use it, et cetera. The second link is actually SASPy, where you can download it from. You can also install it using pip. If you know how to pip install things. I recommend going there because sometimes the package in the PyPy repository is a little bit behind the GitHub repository. All right, configuring it to work. So if you do have SAS installed locally, you can ask SASPy to use your local SAS. That's easy, and they tell you how to do that. For the far majority of us that don't have SAS installed locally, there's a bunch of options. These are the three that I find the most useful depending on what sort of environment you have. The first one is SSH. SSH is like when you remote into a server, you use SSH. This is a fairly straightforward thing if you have just a single SAS box. There's no complicated 3-tier whatever stuff going on, no SAS grid, nothing. Just a server somewhere that has SAS installed on it. SSH is a great solution for that. And it works in both Linux and Windows. And you can take an SSH key, create an SSH key, and allow you to authenticate using that SSH key very easily without having to type a password or anything like that. IOM is the middle one. IOM is particularly useful for more complicated situations, like if you have SAS grid or something like that. That is how Enterprise Guide works under the hood, I think, right? Yeah. So it's a little harder to set up. I use an auth.info file when I use IOM. It uses Java, which is not fantastic. I'm not a huge Java fan. But because it uses Java, it's super flexible and can be used in almost any situation. So IOM is probably a default if you're not sure what else to use. IOM probably is your easy, like it will definitely work with your system. And then COM is the third option. It's sort of like IOM, but it's Windows specific, and it doesn't need Java, which is a big bonus for me. So that's what I use in my particular environment, because COM does work, and I am using Windows, logging into Windows Server, everything like that. All three of these are described in great detail at the links here. You will need some way to connect, right? Some way to put your password in. I don't recommend typing your password interactively. I recommend either using an SSH key or auth.info file. Those are the easiest way to get it so that it can just connect on its own. It doesn't have to wait for you to do anything. Once you've configured that, then I wrote a little wrapper for SASPy to help you connect to SASPy. I have the incredibly creative name of Connect SASPy. Yeah. It is a little Python wrapper. It takes away most of SASPy. It only basically just lets the Agentic AI just connect and submit code, and that's it. But that's helpful for the Agentic AI because then it doesn't do something stupid. And it's also really contains a lot of documentation. So that the Agentic AI knows what to do. So the main things it has start connection and test connection. Test connection is useful because you would rather use the same connection and not start a new one every time. So test connection tests to see if you have an active connection. But you don't have to use either of those because it automatically connects as soon as you instantiate the object. And then there's submit code. That's really easy, right? Submit parentheses code, and the code is a text string of SAS code. That's what the AI will mostly use, and then you can close the connection if it feels like it. But that's pretty much all it is. You, in theory, could use this yourself, although I would just use SASPy directly if you're a human. But limiting it to just this and then documenting it really well and telling the AI exactly what each thing does makes it more likely that it will successfully do what it's supposed to do. A couple of best practices. Use either an SSH key or an auth.info file, like I said, to avoid having to type in passwords. Keep the connect saspy.py, which is the thing, the library, and example usage.py in the folder you're working with. Example usage has a few documented examples of this is how you submit SAS code. Somewhat useful for humans, but really useful for AI, because then it can just look at that example and say, oh, I'll just do exactly the same thing, but change the text. Make sure that SASPy is in your requirements.txt file. If you use a requirements.txt file, it tells Python what libraries to make sure are installed. And then test using Connect SASPy yourself before having the AI do it. That way you can make sure you've solved any problems. You want to make sure that any errors the AI makes are the AI's errors and not you configured something wrong. But you don't need to do that every day or anything. Once you've got it working, you don't have to keep doing it. The AI will automatically connect and use it. All right. Not bad. 20 minutes. That's where we're supposed to be. So now, this was going to be a live demo originally, but then I realized it would take like 10 or 15 minutes, and so instead it's going to be shortened to 5 minutes. But I did it all in one take. I didn't like pick the best or anything. It was my third take, I will admit, because my first two takes I forgot to hit record. But it's one clean take. Is it working? You won't be able to see everything because it's tiny and you're far away. But you can watch it yourself if you go to the GitHub page. I'll have the PowerPoint there. And then you can watch it in sped up real time. This is the prompt that I gave it. I'll leave this up for a minute or so if you want to take a look at it. Now, I do hide most of the prompt behind that first sentence. The first sentence says, use the file sasprompt.txt. That's my pre-prompt. I'll talk about what that is later. That's my generic prompt that I give every SAS program that I would run. Then I tell it to, basically we're running an analysis on the sashelp.baseball data set. Any baseball fans here? Yeah, White Sox? Oh, well. I wouldn't blame you. I'm not really telling you anything complicated. Obviously, for something you're doing at work, you're going to want to have a lot more. That's very hidden. You're going to want to have a lot more here. Maybe I'll use the. No, that's. You want to have a lot more there. Then I tell it to write it to Excel. I like this last thing here. Use professional styling to improve the look and feel of this report so that I can present it to the CEO of my company. It doesn't really do anything, but the AI gets really excited about it. So, you know. And then I tell it to run it and validate that it produces output. Valid output is good. All right. So this is about a 5-minute video that I'll talk a little bit through this. So you'll see Claude code is over here, up to here. Here is the area where it's going to show me programs, and here is the Explorer, right, where we can see the files as it's produced. You see what I started with. I start with the SAS prompt. I start with the sasconfig.py, which is part of it's my SASPy configuration. I keep that in my Git repository locally. I connect SASPy stuff up there, and then the requirements.txt. And then I did create a virtual environment just for this. So that's why you see that venv up there. Over here, it's writing. We already got past the spot where it told me what it was going to do. It asked. I did have it ask me permission to do a lot of things. I'm very risk averse. I like to be asked things. You can configure it to not ask you quite so many things. If you're going to do that, use the sandbox feature in Claude Code, and I think probably Codex has the same thing, where it can't like delete files somewhere else in your system. And you'll see here, it's grabbing some things it needs. I tell it to make a Jupyter notebook, because I like Jupyter notebook for the actual SAS, where the SAS code is going to get run from. I like having a Jupyter notebook because it makes it a little easier to inline see what's happening. So it's getting some stuff it needs. This one also got really weird. You see it says goo good. I don't know what happened. This doesn't normally happen for me, but it did this time. You see it's already written some SAS code there. This is actually the thing we saw earlier, right? The proc report code. But if you look at those variable names, you're going to notice something wrong, and it just did too. Right here, variable AB is not on sashelp.baseball. Variable HR is not on sashelp.baseball, et cetera. So it's already doing that iteration where it already ran to the SAS code, got errors in the log, and is recognizing what's wrong. And what's wrong is that sashelp.baseball has slightly different variable names. So what it's doing right now is checking which columns are on sashelp.baseball. Now, it doesn't know how to do that initially, but it figures it out pretty quickly. It's trying to use the SASPy method. Now, it stopped using connect.saspy for a little while here, but then it goes back to it, which is nice. One thing you'll notice, and I'll talk about this a little later, it likes SQL a lot. Who here is comfortable with SQL? OK, good. That's fine. Yeah, it really, really likes SQL. It knows SQL way better than it does SAS. So I'm tolerant of that when it's checking things. I do, though, tell it, don't use SQL most of the time, because I'm a SAS programmer. If I wanted to write SQL code, I'd be a SQL DBA. Now it's found the issue, and you'll see these red and green lines here. Red is a delete, green is a change, right? It's changing from the red to the green. H becomes number hits, HR becomes n home, RBI becomes nRBI, et cetera. And this is an error. If I ran this again live, it would probably make the same mistake. One thing that I recommend doing is if you recognize that it makes the same mistake repeatedly, add that to your prompt. Tell it, hey, check the column names before you do anything, because it saves you time and tokens and all that if you know it's going to make that error. Now it's updating the proc reports. And now it's going to run it again with the corrected SAS code. Let's take a look. It's vibing. Vibing. Nice. That's not why we call it vibe code, but yeah. I'm a Californian, so. You'll notice that it repeatedly does the things like this. It keeps redoing all of the connect stuff. That's just how Agentic AI doesn't have a great memory for some of its things. The simple things it just does over and over again. But that's why I built in the test connection, so it doesn't make a new connection to SAS every time. Your SASPy session stays persistent, so every time it does this, it tests the connection and says, oh, there's an active connection, I'll just keep using that. So it's way more efficient. You don't have all that, like, at least in my company, I have like a 20-second like sign-on at the beginning. So it avoids having to do that. Looks like it's almost done. It is validating the Excel file. So it wrote an Excel file. It's checking to see if the Excel file is valid. And this is one of those cases where, like I said, it's a little better at Python. So it's checking with, you see pandas there. It's checking with Python to see if the Excel file is correct. That it probably could figure out how to do in SAS also, but it's quicker for it to do in Python. And file is opened. It exists. You see a little checklist there that it double-checked to make sure everything is good. 322 players were analyzed with 100+ at-bats. That's pretty cool. It verifies that all the files are in place. And now it provides me a final summary. This is a fairly verbose Claude. I tell it in the instructions to be a little bit less verbose, but I'm OK with it chatting a lot, giving me these long, you see here, all the stuff that it did tells me about everything. I sort of like that. And then here is the results. Now, I don't know, would Dr. Goodnight want to see this? Probably not. I don't think this is actually CEO level, like I said. But it's OK. But it gets really excited about it. And it tells me, somewhere up there, it tells me how like professional this is. So, and I did not cut this off at the right point, because I got my email pop up right at the end. But that's not bad. And like I said, that took about 10 minutes real time. That was not very long. It wasn't very complicated, but probably would take me more than 10 minutes, even just doing that, right? I'd have to look up the proc report syntax. I'd get a bunch of things wrong. Now, if this was a real report, I would give it a lot more detail on what sort of syntax or what sort of colors to use and things like that. I'd spend a lot of time giving it more guidance as to what a good report looks like. I might even give it a good report and say, I liked this report. Make it look sort of like this. So let's talk about that some. So this is called prompt engineering, and this is instead of developer, right? Now we're going to be prompt engineers. We've all got to change our titles every 2 years anyway. So. I'm in data engineering. Does anyone know what that means? No, I don't either. But it gets me more money, so yeah. All right, so in the prompt, I think of prompt engineering in 3 spaces. First, I think of the settings. So this isn't a prompt per se, but this is the settings of Claude Code or whatever. Here, for example, you can tell it that it's allowed to write in a certain directory or not write in a certain directory. You can tell it to use sandbox mode to really limit it. And you can tell it what things to ask you about and what things that it can just do without asking. That's all in the settings. And then I have what I call a pre-prompt, which is that SAS prompt.txt that I'll talk about in a minute from before. This is a prompt with basic information that is applicable to basically any program. And it guides Agentic AI towards being successful on anything you do. This is where I put the majority of my work. Right? I want this to be really, really good, so that I don't have to spend a bunch of time with it making the same mistakes over and over again, with it not doing things repeatedly. Then on the project, I have the actual prompt, which is the thing I showed you earlier, which is like 8 sentences or something. And this is it has the specifics for what I'm specifically trying to do right now. This is the pre-prompt. And it's going to sort of scroll through this, but don't, like I said, go to the PowerPoint later if you want to actually see what this is, because this is going to be too fast for you to read it. But this tells it to do a few things, right? It tells it things like consider multiple applications multiple implementations of the application, right? Think about maybe doing it a couple different ways. couple of really important things. You'll see towards the bottom, several of these are things that I added over time as I sort of learned. So this section here, the SAS server may not be able to directly access the current working directory of the local Python installation, right? Most of the time when I run something in Claude Code, I probably don't really think about where I'm putting it. I just go to c:/temp/Claude Code. It does stuff there. Well, my SAS server can't read my C drive. And probably most of you that have a SAS server installation also have the same problem. But I'm also forgetful. And so the number of times where I told it, OK, go, in c:/temp/Claude Code, were a lot. And so I added this to the prompt. I not only said, you probably can't see this, but I also said, ask me, if I'm in C, ask me, and ask me for the right directory. And it will actually, Claude Code will happily prompt you. It'll give you a little prompt. It'll say, where should I put it? And then you type in, oh, I meant for this to be in this folder. Below that, when writing output or defining permanent library, use explicit file paths and folder paths. Don't use relative paths. Guess why I put that in there? Because it kept using relative paths, and it was wrong. It didn't end up in the right place. When you run the code, look at the log in the console and look for errors, right? Now, a lot of this stuff, you can think of this as what would you, let's say you hired someone tomorrow, and they're fresh out of college. And they're from a college that doesn't really use SAS, or honestly, even if they did use SAS, colleges are not that great at teaching it, right? They're good at teaching things, but SAS, not so much. We're going to teach them how to write SAS code our way. So what are all the things you're going to teach them in that first week, right? All the stuff you're going to teach them in that first week about how to just use SAS and all the things they should be doing, that's what this pre-prompt is. It's the AI version of that, right? So it's about, as you see, it's 35 lines or something like that. So not too huge, but still, it's still growing. This is not the version I use today. It's grown. Key elements in here. I tell the agent where to find key programs or spaces, and by spaces I mean like areas that the things might be in. I tell it where my Python installation is. I tell it where that thing I was telling you about, but don't access the C drive. Give it environment details that are necessary for your space. Tell it how to write the Python program that runs your SAS code. So that's where I tell it to use SASPy and to use Connect SASPy. Direct what kind of code you want to see. So here's where I tell it, don't use SQL code unless you really need to, because I'd rather see dataset code. Again, it'll write a lot of SQL code otherwise. But if you like SQL, that's fine, right? This is custom to you or to your environment. Learn over, make it a growing document, something you should develop as you learn. As you learn, and by as you learn, I mean as you find problems, as you repeatedly do the same thing like 2 or 3 times. Usually for me, 3 times is enough to put it in the prompt. If the same bad thing happens 3 times, I put something in the pre-prompt to say don't do that. And then after completing a session, consider asking for improvements to the prompt. This applies to both the regular prompt and the pre-prompt, because from its point of view, this is all one prompt, basically. This is a tip that I was given by someone that has really worked out very well. It takes you a while to get to the end, right? You give it a bunch of input, and then it does a bunch of things, and you have to tell it some more things, and maybe you have to tell it some more things. Maybe you have 10 or 15 things you've told it over the course of the session. Well, at the end of the session, if you say, how could I have done a better initial prompt so I didn't have to do all this back and forth, it actually will sometimes tell you that something useful there. It doesn't always. It's not, it's not perfect. But I have learned a lot of things from that where it tells me, oh, you should have done this. Oh, OK. And then either I add that to the pre-prompt, or I just improve my prompt engineering later. The other thing from here, by the way, the pre-prompt is something that's typically, I would recommend, this SAS administrator probably should think about owning that, maybe. Doesn't have to be. If you're a SAS developer that's not a administrator, you can have your own. But if you are an administrator of a site and you have 10 people using Claude Code with SAS underneath you at your site, it is a really good thing for that person to own and make a really good one that everyone uses, because then you have more consistency.
But if they make a bad one, it hurts everyone.
Well, have a good SAS administrator. And this is the original prompt again. And key considerations for this are organize it really well. So at the beginning, you see each of these little paragraphs, right? I tell it I tell it about the pre-prompt, I tell it where to put things, I tell it what it's doing, I tell it what the report should look like, and I tell it to run it and validate it, right? It's very structured, organized. If I do this again, I'm going to just add some additional text here to change this part. I'm going to add some additional text here to change this part maybe. But I'm going to keep that structure, so it's really well organized. Be specific. Tell it where to write the files, right? So I told it, use this folder to write the files. I said, use this data set. I said, write it to an Excel format. And I said XLSX, because I don't want to know what would happen if it tried to make an XLS file, but that would make me sad. If I was doing this for work, down here, I would, for example, tell it to use the styling of my corporate website. Use the style sheet for my corporate website. That would make it look more like, maybe like what my CEO would like to see. I don't know. But being specific means you'll get results that are what you want. And save your prompt outside of the agentic environment. Those of us, again, that are my age, remember forgetting to hit save, and then the computer crashes, and then it's all gone. Well, the problem with agentic AI is depending on how your stuff is set up, you might not easily be able to get back to your prompt. If you finish a session and close the window, it may or may not just, again, depending on how it's set up, you may not be able to easily get that back. I like to have my prompt saved in a file in the project directory where anyone can see it, so other people can use the same prompt. Or, so when I need to run it again, I just go back, open that file, copy, paste, put it in there. You actually can just give the file to Claude and say, here you go, use this file as your prompt. I tend to like to copy and paste, just, I don't know, I'm old. But definitely save it somewhere else. All right. It's only 2 minutes longer than my practice run. Questions? Wait for the microphone.
Art cat.
Did not behave myself well and drink in the middle of this.
So first of all, Joe, I want to say thank you to you because I was trying to convince myself to go deeper into this kind of thing, and you just convinced me, so thank you. And could you go back to the pre-prompt? That might be a silly, probably it is a silly question. No, the slide, because you've got the next one.
The next one?
Yeah,
the actual
this one.
prompt.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. You've got the word please 4 times there. Mm-hmm. Does it really help?
So that's an interesting question. And the answer is yes. It's not because the AI is like polite, right? It's an AI, it's whatever. But people have done research that talking politely to the AI does get better results. And it's not because of the AI, but it's because of the input to the model. Because the input to your model is often in that sort of, people asking questions on Stack Overflow or whatever, right? You end up getting better results when you use things like please and hi and things like that. My pre-prompt, I also say, you are a SAS programmer. Does that do anything? I don't know. But again, research has seemed to show that it does work a little better when you do that.
Yeah, hi, hello.
Hello.
So we are using the VS Code only. For example, how this AI can integrate with the batch processing in the real time, which we can connect to the SAS Grid or SAS 9. Also, which API or which interface we can use to trigger the SAS jobs to get the output. Also, what are the limitations we are having exactly?
Yeah, so for batch processing is more or less how this works, right? This is not opening an interactive SAS session. If you want to kick off a job, if you want to actually use like the scheduler, I'm not sure. That's not an interface we use. We directly run our SAS programs through PowerShell. So I'm not sure on that one. If it is something that can be run through SASPy though, then that works fine. Yeah, limitations. I don't have enough time. that would take a while, but. It's definitely, you're going to find that this is good for some things and this is not as good at other things. But my recommendation is try it out and see if it's able to do, right? I wouldn't necessarily use this as the final production code, right? This isn't necessarily going to produce the final production code, but what it can do is it can produce the initial code, right? Just like you might have a junior programmer write a program and then have someone review it, right? I might have this write the report and then take that production, that SAS code, look at it, change the things that I need to change, make the formatting changes, all that stuff, right? But it saves me a lot of time on doing all of the sort of grunt work part of programming. And then you do those finishing touches to make it really nice. Is sort of, does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned earlier that you work with survey data. So I'm assuming like there is a lot of, I'm not sure like if yours is like HIPAA regulated entity that you work for, if it's a hybrid entity. So what are some of the ethical considerations that you've taken into account before working with Claude and giving it access either to your file repositories or, I don't know, maybe you have a de-identify set that you just work with? Like, if you can share some of that.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously, depending on your environment, depending on what you do, some things are more okay than others. In our case, we have a couple different things that we can do. We have local models that are only running on our compute that don't go anywhere else. I listen to my security people on these. We have it's called an ATO for a lot of our federal work. Authority to operate, I think is what that stands for, that tells us what we're allowed to do, right? And so if a project, we're allowed to do this, then we do. If the ATO says don't use this, then we don't, right? But one of the things you can do is, one of the nice things about using Claude Code this way is I'm not sending all my data to Claude and said, here you go, analyze it for me. I'm telling it to write a SAS program, same SAS program I could write myself, and then it's analyzing it on my SAS server locally. Now, it will sometimes send stuff up to Claude, like when it got the variable names wrong, right? It had to like do a sort of the Python equivalent of a proc print. Actually, I think it did an actual proc print to see what some of the variable names were, right? So it did see some data there. What you can do there, if you have HIPAA regulated data or otherwise PII data that you're not comfortable sending up there, and especially if you're using base Anthropic, right? Then you can you can either create example data, right? So we for example, in the survey research world, we have what's called tests, right? This is probably some of the rest of you do too, right? But for us, what test means is that one of our employees went in and answered the survey like 20 times. Now, they were mostly testing the survey to see if the survey programmer did a good job of putting loops in and stuff, right? But they give us that data. And so I can give it that data and say, here you go, right? Write my program for me. And then when it's done, I can take that program, put it in my production environment, and say, now run against the production code, and now there's no Claude involved anymore, right? Because it's just writing programs. So that's a good way to deal with it if you have data that is not okay to go into the cloud or into the AI.
Two questions. The first question, how long did it take you from when you started the idea of creating this to when you got to a tool like this that was actually working well?
I would say a day or two. It wasn't that long. I've already used SASPy before, right? So I was already using SASPy in Visual Studio Code, so that helped a lot. Writing the wrapper was something I early learned was a necessary thing. It might be better at it now. There's more. They've gotten a lot better since October, November. But the SAS prompt though, or the pre-prompt, that has continued to iterate over time. And like I said, it is different now than it was back then. But yeah, within the first couple days of doing this, I was able to do something theoretically useful at least.
Okay, I guess the harder question then, you said this does a good job of replicating like a junior coder that you tell it what to do and it gives you a first pass. Mm-hmm. Have you used this tool or something similar to this, a similar approach to take production code that maybe has been in use for a while and asked the tool to try to make it better or optimized?
Yeah, so I haven't, but that is a really good use case for it. Part of the problem with being a supervisor is I don't have too much of that stuff of my own anymore. I have people doing that for me, right? That's their job to maintain things. I wish I programmed more, I really do. I'm very sad. I'm not sad about the paycheck, but sad about the lack of programming. I have done that with our Shiny stuff. So not with SAS, but with our Shiny dashboards. And it's pretty good at finding errors and seeing what the errors are and sort of bug fixing errors. I would say that is definitely a very good use for it. I wouldn't necessarily use it to refactor code like in a big way. We are doing some work where we give it code in one format, and then we say, now we're going to write code in this other format, and use it as a, like, this works, now write something differently that produces the same results afterwards. That it's pretty good at.
This is our last question.
Okay.
What have you noticed about token efficiencies, and how much utilization of tokens does a program have?
Yeah, so a lot of this depends on how complicated your code is and how fancy of a model you want to use. I did this on Sonnet 4.5, I think. Now, when I did it, Sonnet 4.5 was new. Now we have, I think, 4.7, so I'm still using 4.5, and it works fine, and it's a lot cheaper now. But I have a budget of like $20 or something a month, I think, and I don't use that. So like this probably, I think this costs less than $1 or something like that. Like it's pretty efficient for simple things. What is more expensive is when you're giving it a lot of text. So for example, what you were saying about give it production code and tell it to refactor that. If your production code is like thousands of lines or something, it needs to put all those 1,000 lines in the context window constantly and repeatedly. That's where it gets really expensive. If you're able to, so Claude Code, you're able to tell different model. You can give it like 3 different model types, I think, and tell it to use the sort of like, is a Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus is the Anthropic versions, right? You can tell it to use Haiku for the planning, use Sonnet for the main work, and then Opus for the like double checking or something, right? Like it actually, and then you're going from cheapest, using the cheapest for the most theoretically most expensive part, and then using the middle level for the like most difficult model to do. And then I don't really use Opus, but you could use Opus for sort of the final touches. That's a really good way to save money. And if you're using private models, you can map your private models to Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. So it uses the cheapest private model for some work. It uses the middle private model for some work, and then the most expensive private model for some work.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I'll be around. Feel free to message me on DMs or whatever, and I've got that GitHub page from the beginning.